Cool. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today and for coming along to listen to me talking about one of my absolute favourite things, which is coprolites. So just to give a wee introduction to who I am. So my name's Katie Strang, and I'm one of the trustees with the Scottish Geology Trust. And I also do the Scottish Geology Festival, which is on in September and October. That's just a wee shameless plug there. So check out the website. And also the Edinburgh Geological Society. They have provided some funding for some of this work. So to say thank you to them. And yeah, so for the last sort of year or so, I've been going into the collections at the Hunterian to have a look at some of the material that's in there. So what I'm going to do first is just do a little brief introduction to what coprolites actually are. So I'm just going back, sorry. So coprolites, what are they? So the word actually comes from the Greek language, and it literally means like dung-stone. And it was this guy here, which is William Buckland, who you may have heard of. He is quite a famous paleontologist. And sort of in the early decades of the 19th century, there was like a lot of rapid change in geological thought going on. And one of the main participants in this, and one of the sort of founding people, was William Buckland. And this image on the bottom is one of my favourite images, and this is a lithograph titled A Coprolitic Vision. And this is William Buckland here, standing at a cave, lecturing to a cave full of animals, Pleistocene animals, and these are bezoars here, or they look like big spiral coprolites. And what I love about this is it kind of shows that there was this found interest in coprolites. And when William Buckland first coined the term in 1829, that kind of started this like scientific interest, and people, they just got really excited by them and found them absolutely fascinating. And yeah, this image, it just sort of perfectly shows that. And you can see some of the animals here are actually portrayed in the middle of doing a poo there. And do need to mention, though, that it was this lady here, Mary Anning, who she was pretty fundamental in this. So although William Buckland did coin the term, it was actually Mary Anning who sort of first started thinking about coprolites, and it was about 1824 that she actually first sort of recognised what these were. And although William Buckland was the first person in 1829, there was references in the literature before that from other people. For example, there's a guy called John Woodward who he found specimens from chalk, which he described as sort of fossilised plant cones. But they were then later redescribed as coprolites. So there is earlier mentions to this. But yeah, Mary Anning was absolutely pivotal to William Buckland actually realising what these were. And a lot of her collecting down on the sort of Dorset coast, she would collect material, and these coprolites would quite often be in association with material, sort of with ichthyosaurs and other body fossils. So that's one of the reasons that she was able to sort of figure out what these unusual objects were. And this image here is, sorry, I keep going too fast on my slide here. Okay, so this image here is absolutely awesome, right? So you may have seen this online before, but this is basically the first ever paleontological reconstruction of an early ecosystem. And it's sort of translates to a more ancient Dorset. And if you look very closely at this image, not only are a lot of these creatures attacking each other, but a lot of them are also being portrayed again having a poo. So there is this sort of fascination, and it was, it wasn't just within the scientific community as well. You had, people who were doing these kind of artworks and really becoming absolutely fascinated with this kind of new world of geology and these new ways of thinking as well. And this lithograph, you can go and see that online if you just Google the name of it, or a more ancient Dorset. And it's really fun having a wee look and trying to see how many coprolites you can actually count within that image. And like there is a term that's been used as well to describe the kind of Victorian fascination with coprolites. And some people have actually called it copromania, which I really like. And like people, you know, they weren't just collecting these for like the scientific sort of value. They were also absolutely fascinated with them as a decorative thing. So this text here is from Richard Bull's article in one of William Buckland's publications from 1836. And here he's talking about a site in Scotland on the east coast, where basically the nodules were strewn so thickly upon the shore that in a few minutes it allowed him to collect more specimens than he could carry. And this image here is some of these so-called nodules. So these come from a place called Wardie, which is in Edinburgh. And what is really, really cool about these that occur in the nodules is that you can, in fact, cut and polish them. So they became quite sought after, and they were traded, and you know, people would even make jewelry out of them, and they were called beetle stones. So if you look at them here, they do look a bit like they could be some sort of beetle or insects. They've got these sort of crack lines here that look a bit like legs. But these are, in fact, all coprolites. And at that site, you do get nodules that contain fossil fish. So nodules are a sedimentary feature that normally will form around some sort of nucleus. And in this case, it happens to be coprolites. And some of them look absolutely beautiful when you cut them open. And William Buckland loved them so much that he made this thing here, which is a table. It's held in the Lyme Regis Museum. And it is quite literally a jobby table. So he set all these coprolites into this table. And for a long time, people actually thought they were coprolites from down in the south coast. But there was investigations done, and people eventually realised that these were quite distinctly coprolites that have come from Wardie in Scotland. So this is probably one of Scotland's most famous coprolite sites. And I'm just going to look a little bit at coprolite terminology before I go to show you some of the material that I've been working on. Now, you don't need to know this too much. It's just to sort of explain the differences. So you may have heard the term bromellite, and that basically means that sort of encompasses all types of coprolite. And coprolites are trace fossils, so that means they are fossils which show evidence of past behaviour of the animal rather than being of the animal itself. And coprolites obviously will tell us a lot about the diet of these animals. But if you look here, this is the diagram is just showing you the kind of different stages of basically how material will move through an animal's digestive system. And when you get a coprolite that's basically inside the animal, that's not been expelled, that is normally called a coleolite. And there's also another term that you'll hear me mention, which is enterospiry. And enterospiries are thought to be when you have an animal and for whatever reason, this animal, this fish or the shark has died, and basically the gut has remained preserved, but the rest of the animal has decayed away. And that is one of the things that I'm looking at and trying to determine with the material and the coprolite material. Are they true coprolites? So have they actually been expelled by this animal, or are they enterospiry? So has the animal decayed away around it? And there's quite a lot of different terminology being used, and there's been several attempts for people to kind of standardise this, but it hasn't really sort of taken off yet. But more and more people are trying to use the same terminology so that you can then compare the different types of coprolite at different sites. And I'm going to just look now at the geological setting of the coprolites that I'm going to be talking about. And this here is for those that don't know, is a sort of geological timescale. And this is showing you the Carboniferous. Now, on the map here, in the central belt of Scotland, all this kind of blue stuff is the Carboniferous rocks. And the Carboniferous rocks are economically important because that is where most of our coal is, and also a lot of our limestones. And we have exploited those quite a lot throughout the Central Belt. And because we've done that, one of the good things that have come from that is the fact that we know a lot about the geology of the Carboniferous in Scotland. And that's through various different methods. So that's things like going out into the field and mapping, but also places like the British Geological Survey, they will do boreholes where they will get a core sample, and then they're able to see what's actually going on underneath your feet. And the sort of timescales that I'm looking at are towards the lower Carboniferous, so earlier on. And you're looking at about sort of roughly 330-ish million years to about 320 million years ago, which in geological time is not actually that long at all. And just to mention, there is some other sites in Scotland where you do get coprolites. There's quite a famous site up in Aberdeenshire called the Riney Chert, and they've found evidence of coprolites in there where you can see like fungi spores and stuff, which is really, really cool. But the ones that I'm interested in are these early Carboniferous ones. And the environment of that time was very, very different. So we have to kind of go back and think about where Scotland would have been. And Scotland, as we know it now, would have actually been down towards the equator. So we were at very, very low latitudes during this time, and we were kind of drifting northwards towards and over the equator. And this diagram here is showing you a kind of superimposed of modern day Scotland, the outline and what these environments would have been. So the Carboniferous, obviously, is very famous because of the coal, and that meant there was a lot of really, really dense and vast coal swamps that covered quite large areas of the central belt of Scotland. And the sort of climate and the different environments in the Carboniferous tell a really nice story. So they kind of occurred in cycles. So you would have periods where your sea level would rise and you would have shallow tropical seas covering areas. But some areas would actually get cut off from that sea, and that would form basically a lagoonal environment. So this kind of brackish environment that's not quite freshwater, not quite marine environment. And these sort of changes in the sort of climate and the environment in the Carboniferous, and we do see that really nicely in the rock record and as you go into the later Carboniferous as well. But the sites that I'm looking at would have been sort of in here. So first of all, this diagram is showing a paleogeographical setting of, it's actually for the West Lothian oil shale formation, but it really nicely shows the area that I'm going to be talking about in a wee minute, which is this here, which is Lake Cadell or Loch Cadell, because we're in Scotland. And you can see that this is just showing you these different environments that were existing during this time period. And I'm not sure how well you can see it, but this is like the sort of modern coastline here. So there is Fife, where I am at the moment. And these sort of environments, these lagoonal environments, are exposed in some areas. So obviously the West Lothian oil shales are very, very famous because those as well were of great economic importance. And the sites, one of the sites that I'm looking at, which is in Fife, sort of falls on the edge of this big freshwater loch that was pervasive in the Carboniferous periods. And it also deposited something called the Birdie House limestone, which is quite famous because that's a freshwater limestone, and it was utilised as well for not only making building materials, but also for things like fertiliser. So one thing you'll notice about the Carboniferous is that we have exploited and utilised quite a lot of these different geological units. And the first site I'm going to talk about is one that is very, very famous, which I'm pretty sure everyone will have heard of, which affectionately named the Bearsden shark. So you can go and see this. This is on display in the Hunterian just now. And it's definitely really worth going to have a look because it's absolutely amazing. So for those that might not know, sharks are sharks because they're made of cartilage and not bone. And that means that cartilage, because it's a soft tissue, it just doesn't really like to preserve very well in the fossil record. So to actually have this material here preserved so well, that you have things like the cartilage preserved, but you also have in here this, which is a coleolite, so basically a coprolite that has not been passed yet. And the coprolite here is sort of full of little bits of scale and things. And what's really cool about that is if you're able to see these things in context of an animal, that can give you a lot of information that you can then use to infer information from coprolites that aren't associated with body fossils. And unfortunately, it's actually quite rare to find coprolites actually associated with their producer. There's a variety of reasons for that, but a lot of it is just to do with to become a fossil, you really have to have quite good luck. You know, the conditions have to be just right. But this site here, as I say, is very, very famous. And in the collections at the Hunterian, there is a lot of material from this particular site near Bearsden. And Dr Neil Clark, who's the curator of paleontology, worked and described this material during his PhD thesis. And he recognised 3 basic groups of coprolites there. And just to explain what I mean by this sort of these groups, basically what we need to do is look at the shape, what we would call the morphology of the coprolites, because that will give us a really good indication of what might have actually produced that. And that's because the shape of your poo is ultimately dependent on the shape of your sort of internal digestive system and the shape of your gut and your colon. So we know that things like sharks, modern sharks, they have got sort of this spiral digestive system. And that means that when they poo, it coils around and it will come out with this sort of spiral pattern, which you can see quite nicely in these images here. And these are from Neil's PhD thesis. And these are some of the samples from the collections, which the plan for these is to go through them because we have, there's lots of material here and you can see the coprolites tend to actually be loose, so they're not in matrix. But one of the good things about coprolites is that there tends to be quite a lot of them. So if you find a site with lots of coprolites, it means that we are able to do more kinds of analysis that you wouldn't be able to do if it was a really rare one-off fossil. So what I mean by that is a lot of the techniques that you used and apply to look at coprolites are what we would call destructive techniques. And one of the techniques that we're using is something called petrography, and that is using a petrographic microscope. And you get a really, really thin layer of your sample, which is polished down to 30 microns. So that's like half the thickness of a bit of your hair. And then you can shine light through that under the microscope. And that will give us a really good idea of sort of the mineralogy and what is contained within the coprolites. So why is the mineralogy important? The mineralogy is important because that is to do with taphonomy, and taphonomy is one of my absolute favourite things. So taphonomy basically just means the process by which an organism it dies and how it becomes a fossil. So what are those chemical changes and what is happening to that organism after it dies, and what is happening to it as it gets sort of buried underneath the sediment and undergoes what we call diagenesis. And that's important because when you think about sort of body fossils, so for example, if you have a fish that dies, and it falls to the bottom of the sea or a lake somewhere. And first of all, quite often they will get predated on. So you will have animals who will come and they'll scavenge and they will eat whatever they can find. And that means that it's not going to be necessarily preserved as a fossil. But also when an animal dies, they start to decay. And there's been a lot of work and experimental work done on taphonomy that shows certain parts of an animal will decay first. So if you've got a fish that maybe has sort of some sort of pectoral fin, and that is maybe lost first, what you actually get that survives and lasts as a fossil might not actually be a true representation of that animal. And that can lead to a lot of misinterpretation of what you're looking at. And when you understand the taxonomy and you understand what changes have happened to this fossil during the fossilization process, you can actually use that to work backwards and address any sort of bias you might find in the fossil record. And by bias, I just mean things that have a hard skeleton are more likely to preserve. So you're going to find more of those than you will of soft body organisms. So it is really important to understand the processes that have led to the coprolites becoming preserved. And this is another one from Neil's thesis, which the image on the last slide in the middle, this is a image that we've taken recently. Now, this is actually a fossil shrimp, which is sort of going across this very weird looking object here. And this is one that we're looking at because the theory is this is probably actually a gut of an animal, not actually the coprolite. So the reason for this thinking is you can see it's got this really distinct sort of spiral shape here, and just the shape of it is not what you would sort of presume for a coprolite, because it's got a lot of structure to it, and typically poo is not very hard. So when it comes out, it's not going to retain its structure as well. And that's partly where this whole debate comes from about enterospirae and coprolites and which is which. Because one of the arguments is if they're very well preserved and you see a lot of structure, that maybe that actually is the gut of the animal, because it's not actually been pooped out and then plopped to the bottom of the lake. And in doing that, obviously, you will lose some material. And I don't know if anybody's ever looked at videos of sharks pooing, but there's a surprising number of those online. And they do quite like explosive poops, modern sharks, to try and like expel it away from them. And by looking at sort of modern analogues, that can really help when you're looking at the fossil records. So I've been contacting some aquariums to hopefully get some shark poo, but you're usually met by like very weird responses because they're like, wait, you actually want some poo? So it's quite a hard thing to explain to people, but it'd be really cool to work with the Sea Life Centre, because you could then, take along some of these fossils to show the animals and how they've sort of evolved to modern day. So yeah, with this one, currently trying to work out at the moment exactly what this could have come from and what kind of digestive system this is. But it's a really cool sample. And another one, I'm going to show you the next one here. So I'm going to go on to the other sites that I'm looking at. So that one was the Bearsden one, which we're working through that material. And obviously, because there has been work done on it already, what's really good about it is that building on that and using, techniques that have advanced, we can then hopefully find new information. But because there has been work done on that, it's a really good starting ground for then looking at material elsewhere. Now, there was a lot of work done on coprolites in the east coast of Scotland by Dr Daphne Summers during her PhD at the University of St Andrews. And she looked at sites sort of in the up near Anstruther and also like Queensferry as well. And the site that I'm looking at is from near a wee place called Burnt Island, which is sort of mid-Fife on the coast. And the rocks there are, again, these kind of lagoonal sediments. So you have like shales and you also have stromatolites. So there was periods where the lakes would sort of periodically produce these stromatolites, and the lakes would then dry out, and that would cause a lot of cracking and desiccation within your stromatolites. So all this information from the rocks as well is telling us a lot about the environment. So one of the things you do when you're looking at sediments quite often is do something called a sedimentary log. And that is just looking at, the different layers that make up this formation. And here you can see what is a freshwater limestone unit, which has got some kind of shale in the middle. But these lumps here are coprolites. So my very good term for this, my favourite term, is Jobbyiferous sediments, which I feel like we can get to take off, but it's honestly, it's absolutely like poaching with them. So you know, there's an abundance of material, and I should say none of this has been collected from the bedrock. All material has been collected from loose material, and the reason for that is just you shouldn't be hammering up or whacking coastal rocks or sections. So just to bear that in mind. But the material that we've been looking at, a lot of it has come from the shales here. And the shales are quite soft, which means, you know, when you have big storms and things, you will get bits broken up and sort of messed up, and you're able to collect those. So by looking at these ones, you can see quite distinctly, if you remember the ones that I showed you from Bearsden, they were very dark in colour. And these ones they look totally different. So this is a different kind of preservation style that we're seeing. And that can be to do with a variety of reasons. It's one of the things that we are trying to work out. But these images here are showing the main morphotype. So by morphotypes, I just mean the different shapes of the coprolites. So this one here, you can see it's what some people call like physiform. It's got it sort of tapers at both ends. And at the bottom of this one, you can see that there is actually evidence of these coils. So you can see that really, really nicely in some of these samples. But other morphotypes we have are like this one, which just kind of appears to be like a big sort of mass of material. And these are they're usually preserved in like calcium phosphate, which is the kind of like light buffy coloured material. But you can see within this one, it's absolutely full of inclusions, and inclusions are one of the things that we are really interested in. So so far from the pit and wean formation ones, I've gone through over 100 coprolite samples. And what I'm doing is basically really basic measurements to start with, and that is measuring the total length and also the width of the coprolite, and then taking a note of any structure that you're able to see. And so for this one, you can talk about how you can see some of that whorls, but then obviously this one, there doesn't appear to be much structure. So what I have done is I'm waiting to get the samples back, but we are getting thin sections made. So again, these really thin slices of the coprolites. And that will allow me to look at not just the internal structure, but it will also allow me to look at the sediments around the coprolites, which is really important just to understand how they were preserved. And then we have this morphotype here, which has got this kind of elongate shape to it. And this one, it doesn't appear when you look here to have much structure, but there is some cracking here. And when you see this, it could mean that these are actually, it's cracked where there has been some sort of fold. But for this one, again, this morphotype, we are going to have to analyse in a thin section to actually understand better what's going on. But you can see this one does have inclusions as well, but just not as much as this one. And that's quite interesting. And it's something that you need to sort of bear in mind when you're thinking about the coprolites, is that why, if you're eating something, or the shark or the fish is eating something, why is this much material coming out as a coprolite? Why isn't it digested? And that could just be that it's material that won't digest, or maybe it was, you know, had some sort of upset stomach and it's not actually had a chance to digest it before it's expelled. And again, by looking at these thin sections, that will then enable us to try and work out as well, hopefully, whether these are coleolites or if they are true coprolites. And at the moment, the evidence is leaning more towards them being coprolites. And it's really cool because starting to look at the different inclusions within each different morphotype starts to build a picture of what was actually going on within the ecosystems here. So if you have an animal that's full of all sorts of different kinds of material, like, you know, different species of fish, and maybe some plant material as well, that animal was very likely a scavenger. and would have just been going about and eating and grazing and finding whatever it could. But when you have one that is dominated by just one type of sort of inclusion, like in these ones, it tends to be mostly dominated by things like fish scales. And that probably means that it was made by a predator. And that's because your predators would have like they're able to basically choose what they want to eat and will have adapted to be able to behave in that way. And I'm just going to move the little thing with people's faces so that I can see the end ones that I'm going to talk about. So if you look at this one here on the very right-hand side, this is one that has an absolutely incredible structure to it. So you can see really, really clearly this folding. And this is one of the ones that would fall under the kind of debatable, is this an enterospirey? Because it is so perfectly preserved there. And, you know, it is unlikely if you're going to go to the toilet and you're swimming about in a sort of tropical freshwater lagoon. As I said, that your coprolite, your poo is very likely going to break apart and become desiccated, and it's not going to survive very well. So this one, when we get thin section, it'll be really nice to see this and actually be able to understand what is going on, not just with the structure, but the preservation. And you can see this has got like this kind of brown outer, what you call like a skin to it. And that is one of the other arguments that people have for these being sort of enterospirey rather than coprolites. And then this one here, this one, second one along, and quite a lot of this. So these ones are kind of like, there's not really, again, any shape to them, but they don't look like this second one here. They are a lot more spherical. So all these different things are really, really important. And a lot of people ask me, like, you know, how do you know it's a coprolite? And there's a variety of different factors that you have to take into account. So the first thing is, and it's really important, is the location. So if you know about those rocks, the kind of rocks, that will tell you about the environment. And we know that a lot of these coprolite deposits in Scotland occur in these kind of freshwater brackish environments. And then the second thing is what I've just been talking about, these inclusions and trying to understand you know, what different types of inclusion are in there. But when you see inclusions within a coprolite, that again is going to tell you that it's likely a coprolite. And also the structure as well. So if you are seeing these really nice spiral structures, that is a very good indication too. And we've looked at some of these samples in hand specimens, so not making a thin section, actually just using sort of high-powered magnification on a microscope to look at the detail that you can see. Now, if you look in these, you see this kind of swirly pattern, and this is all to do with the way like when it's basically in the animal's gut, how it's all folded inside, and you can see that structure really, really nicely. And what I'm like really hoping to find in some of these is plant material, because coprolites from herbivores or plant eaters are actually a lot rarer compared with ones from carnivores. And that's because your gut and your poo has a very, very distinct sort of biome and chemistry. And they're almost acting as like these little sort of micro environments. And if you're eating things like, you know, if you're eating other animals, your coprolite will tend to have a very high phosphate content. And in these environments, these lagoonal environments, this phosphatic material seems to have sort of preferentially preserved. And, you know, you might be wondering right now, why is this important to this site at all? And the reason it is important is this particular site near Burnt Island, you don't actually find really that many body fossils at all. So found the occasional fish fossil, found the occasional tooth from types of shark, but we don't really have much else in the way of information on what was actually living at the time. So by looking at the coprolites and these inclusions, we're hoping to build this better picture of what was actually going on in this ecosystem. And because I didn't have too long for the talk, there is some other sites that I'm looking at, and it's a similar thing that we'll be doing with these. And what will be really good about this is that you can then actually group each of these formations into what you would call sort of an assemblage of ichnotypes or morphologies. And by looking at these and comparing them across the different sites, hopefully that is going to tell us a lot about the different environments and what was living where and who was eating who as well. But the reason like the plant material just doesn't tend to survive that well in the coprolites, and it's the same throughout the geological record that herbivore material is a lot rarer. But here there is some interesting black material here that may be plant. And one of the things you have is obviously a lot of the material is incredibly fragmented, because if it's gone through a digestive system, it's not going to be nice and perfect. But the other inclusions that are really, really interesting, and this is one of my favourite ones, and this is a coprolite which has kind of formed in a nodule. So at this site, you get these creamy coloured phosphatic coprolites, but there is a bed of the shale where you get these nodules forming, just like you do at Wardy. And here is a microscope image where you can see this kind of interesting texture. And this is a sort of zoomed in image of it. And this is probably a fish tooth plate. So some fish have these tooth plates for sort of grinding and things. And what's really cool about this is that, well, I've never actually found any of these tooth plates on their own, but also if you know that's in there, then you can sort of say, if you can work out which fish it's come from, you'll be able to say a lot about what ate that, because, you know, there is sort of a hierarchy within the ecosystem for a reason. And so this one at the moment still trying to sort of determine the exact species of fish, just because obviously not the whole thing is preserved. But these is really, really cool when you find these like super interesting inclusions within your coprolites. And just to sort of finish up here and summarize, is that, yeah, so coprolites, they can tell us a lot. So especially if you don't have any other fossil evidence, by looking at coprolites, they can tell us a lot about not just the organism's diet, they can also tell you things about parasites, and they can also tell you things about the other animals who were maybe scavenging on coprolites as well. So there's a whole host of information that we can gain from this. And yeah, it's why I love them so much, because, you know, as I say, typically at sites where you find coprolites, they will be absolutely poaching with them. And because of that, it means that you are able to do this kind of destructive analysis to gain the most information. And I've just finished off with a wee slide about the Scottish Fossil Code here. So if you do want to go out and look for your own jobbies, then please let me know if you find anything cool, but do check out the Scottish Fossil Code, which is on the Nature Scot website, that will tell you the best way to go about collecting material. But I will finish up there because I think I have spoke too long. I'm very sorry for running over.